All right, good morning. Oh, I need to adjust my mirrors. That's actually a weird topic that I'd like to do. I've probably mentioned it before, but I'd like to do a vlog on how to properly adjust side mirrors on a car, because when you have them adjusted properly, you can see on other cars when they don't have them adjusted properly. And if other drivers don't have them adjusted properly, then they probably can't see you very well. So I would like all other drivers on the road to have their mirrors adjusted so they can see me, so that we can avoid conflict. So speaking of avoiding conflict, I wanted to talk today about a thing I'm going to call the dog delusion. And the dog delusion is, well, I might have to break this one up because I think I'm going to have to stop and get some gas. But the dog delusion, it stems from, there are a whole bunch of factors here that go into it, and I have a lot of friends who own dogs, and they take dog ownership very, very, very seriously. But at the same time, I'm regularly interacting, not by choice, with people who don't seem to have the same mindset about dog ownership. Now, the ones that I know who have dogs that I think deal with the situation very well is they pretty much spend a lot of their time figuring out how to best raise the best dog they can. And then there are other people, and so they do things like they realize that there can be conflicts between dogs and humans who just don't know each other and don't understand each other. So they seem to be cautious about their dog's interaction with people and other dogs. And I'd just say cautious, and and maybe even deliberate is so when they introduce their dog to a new person, it's in a way that if anything starts to go a little weird, then they have control over their dog and they can, intervene if necessary. And so the whole thing serves as training, both for their dog, as well as for any new people who are going to be around their dog. And so, I've had friends that had little dogs that would just snuggle up to you, and all they really seem to want in the world is your warmth, and they weren't up in your face or anything like that. They just wanted to snuggle all the time. And then I've had other dogs that I've known people with other dogs that were just very high strung and were always jumping up on people and this kind of stuff. And the main thing I wanted to talk about is the interaction with children, because in the United States, I looked up some stats. They were from Wikipedia. Wikipedia usually has a reference for this kind of thing. I didn't have a chance to dig into it, so they could be a little off. But it said that dogs bite in the United States about 2% of the population annually, which as of that stat was about 4.5 million conservatively people in the United States, and most of them are children. And now I've talked with my mailman about this as well. He was telling me some interesting things about dogs in the neighborhood, and it's just really interesting to me, because while I do know a bunch of people who take dog ownership very seriously and responsibly, I think that's the key. They raise their dogs in the way they do because they feel responsible and know that they're legally responsible for the actions of their dog, which under the law in my state, dogs are property. So it's interesting to me that, and I'm sure that like the vast majority of dog owners I'm not running into, because they're they're not going into the kinds of places where I go. But it just seems to me that of the people I know, a lot more of them are in the category of irresponsible dog owners than responsible ones, and that goes to varying degrees. I've talked with a friend online about it, and it's interesting because he almost seems to put dogs on a higher pedestal than people. When it comes, like, if there's a decision to be made, he's going to favor the dog. So yeah, I think that's really interesting. I was talking to the mailman. The mailman had an interaction. They apparently have an alerter that alerts them to when they're coming to a house that has a dog that has been known to bite mailmen. And so he has one that sounds a little alert. And I thought it was interesting too, because they had a situation where one of the neighbor's dogs bit the mailman, and it bit the mailman, and the mailman used chemical spray to stop the dog from coming at him. And when the mailman filed a report about the incident, the people who lived at the house, they didn't accept responsibility for it. They turned around and they said that the mailman instigated it, and the mailman maced the dog first for no reason, because my mailman has time for that, and then filed a false report to cover up his psychotic need to mace dogs for no reason. So anyway, so that kind of stuff happens in my neighborhood. Also, there's a guy that has a big German Shepherd, and he walks it around the neighborhood, and he's always got a leash on it. But one time my wife was watching, and there was just a passerby walking, and the dog just bit the guy, and he was like bleeding from the wound, and they seemed to interact very calmly about the whole thing, and the bleeding guy seemed to go with the other guy to his house, and then the bleeding guy left, and I don't think he was bleeding anymore. But after that, we saw the German Shepherd being walked with a muzzle by the owner, and then later on over the holidays we saw a relative walking the dog without a muzzle, and I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. So I mean, I try and keep track of whose dogs are doing what, because I have little children that are often playing in the yard, and so far most of the dogs and stuff stay on the outside of the perimeter, but I still try and be aware. We often go outside the perimeter ourselves, go on walks and stuff. So anyway, I'm gonna get some gas, and then I'll come back and pick up where I left off. All right, so yeah, I wanted to give a little backgrounder on some of the laws. I plan on going and reviewing this a little bit more, but my understanding of the leash laws in my area is that you can have your dog off of a leash out in public, but you need to have control over the dog. So a really good example of what I would consider to be control of the dog is that I have a I ride my bike to work often, and in the mornings there's a woman who is out playing fetch with her dog in the park, and whenever I approach on my bike, she notices ahead of time, and she gives the dog a series of commands, and the dog is a little bit nervous because there's a cyclist coming and stuff, but it follows her commands, and it seems to understand that if it just does what she says, everything's going to be okay. And the dog, I've never had a problem with the dog. This is a dog that seems to be under control, under the, what I would consider to be under control under the statute. So another thing that, but I also see people who, they seem to believe to have their dogs under control, but because their dog is not on a leash, but they're yelling their dog's name authoritatively, repeatedly. The dog is ignoring them. They're just yelling, Buster, Buster, here now, Buster. And it's just like, I see kids doing that with their kids too. They are just yelling the same thing over and over again, and the kid is completely ignoring them. And so it's just not effective. So I mean, there are two different approaches I see to people who don't have their dogs on leashes. So anyway, it was a nice day yesterday, so I decided to take my kids on a walk to the park nearby, the playground, not just a park. It's a playground built for children. It's at a children's school. And I took my kids over there, and they seem to have a relatively friendly attitude toward dogs in general. There's a post with dog cleanup bags, which maybe if I get some time later on, I'll talk a little bit about. You know, I think it's probably not a good idea to encourage people to use a playground as the dog's toilet, but that's neither here nor there. In fact, even though there are all these signs that say please clean up after your pet, there was a giant pile of dog poop in the middle of the playground that I had to keep reminding my kids to go around, and they don't really have dog poop in their yard to go around. So, and luckily I don't think any of them have stepped in it yet. Someone was telling me the other day, you always remember your first time. So yeah, there was some evidence that inconsiderate dog owners had been using the park before. And anyway, my kids were playing happily on the playground equipment, and I was helping them do stuff like monkey bars because they're really small. And in the distance, I noticed that someone was walking their dog into the park, and the dog didn't appear to be on a leash. I noticed mostly because of the great distance that, the dog was probably about 25 yards away from the person who was walking it. And so I notified my kids, and we need to work a little bit on how we respond to that situation. They got a little bit excited about it. They love dogs, but they also have had, whenever we encounter a dog when we're out on a walk, we make sure it's on a leash, and then as long as it's on a leash, we go through a process of asking the owner if the dog is friendly, and if we can like touch it. And usually if the dog is a little jumpy or whatever, then the owner calms the dog down and stuff, and the kids very cautiously approach and try and make friends with the dog and stuff like that. And so I let them go and interact with dogs and stuff all the time. I want them to learn how to do it properly.
Manual recording will now start.
But they don't always, it usually goes really well. But they're really excited. They love dogs. They watch a lot of shows with dogs. They just have a grand time with dogs, and they love them. So anyway, they were a little, they're like a little curious, like, hey, there's a dog coming. What's this gonna mean? And they started, I asked them just to come and play closer to me, just in case this dog was a problem, even though it had an owner with it. And so then they came over and started playing closer to me. But as the dog and owner got closer, the owner kept walking on a vector closer and closer to the playground equipment. She wasn't like going around by any kind of wide margin. It was pretty clear that she was going to walk right past it. And so even though the dog wasn't all that interested, the dog was over by a fence line, once again about 25 yards away. The owner came over and started some conversation with my kids, which I don't mind. I think that it's important that kids need to learn to interact with their neighbors and stuff. So I was just kind of listening to the conversation that they were having with the lady, and it was just about general stuff. It wasn't even about dogs. It was just, oh, hi, are you out on a walk? Blah, 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 stuff like that. So, but, I was also pretty close to my kids, especially my youngest one. And after a couple minutes, and the conversation was kind of, I don't know, it was okay, but it was a little weird. Like, it was really snowy still, and the kids had snow pants on, even though they were wearing sweatshirts up top. And they were also wearing waterproof boots, like snow boots, because they were jumping around in snow that was melting. And it was, it was a little chilly, and they were jumping in these like really cold puddles and stuff like that. So it seemed appropriate for their activity. And the dog walker was kind of like, whoa, aren't you guys hot? You look a little overdressed. Which is like, it's always struck me as a weird suggestion to question someone's like, I don't know, whether or not they're too warm or too hot. I mean, it's like my kids, if they're too warm or too hot, they take something off, and I do the same thing. So it seems to me pretty natural for people who are too hot or too cold to adjust that themselves. They don't really need a suggestion from a third party to do that. So it seemed to me a little weird. And around that time, the dog all of a sudden took an interest in my kids, and like kind of started like really throaty, heavy breathing, put its head down like it was kind of charging, and then bolted across the playground right up to my daughter, which is not how I would introduce my dog to small children. So, and the owner had a leash draped across her shoulders, but she didn't, you know, she obviously wasn't connected. And, you know, I guess my take is, when like if I were out walking a dog at a playground with children, if I didn't see any children, you know, I might let my dog run around off the leash. But if I saw children there, until I established, you know, what was going on and everything, I would probably pause and get control of my dog and put it on the leash, and then go over, and then we'll see, you know, maybe the dog would be interested in meeting the kids, maybe not. When we're past, you know, I'd go and let it run, you know, more again, unhook it from the leash and stuff. But at least while I was near the kids, I'd make sure I had control over it in case it, you know, darted or something like that at them. So anyway, the dog comes up rather suddenly, and in my opinion, aggressively. And so I stepped over right next to my daughter, you know, to make sure that, you know, I could, you know, to help her, because she was actually up on a small piece of play equipment. It wasn't easy for her to step back or run away. She seemed to be cornered. And my daughter kind of reacted like she was startled and scared. And the owner is like, oh, even though you've had this dog come racing like 25 yards across the playground in a couple instants, you know, making snarly noises at you, and it's now like right up, you know, about 3 feet away from you, and you're, you know, 6, and your face is like right near the dog's, you know, mouth level, and it's a strange dog you've never seen before, you don't need to worry. She's like, he just loves kids, he's great with kids. Well, I mean, he just aggressively ran across the playground and got in one of their faces. So I'm standing there right next to her, trying to let her gain some experience from the situation, and also, you know, I'm also right there in case anything starts to go, you know, south. But still, the dog is about 3 feet away and stuff. And at that point, my daughter said, I'm scared. So the woman then proceeded to say, oh, you know, you don't need to be scared. She was essentially like, you, 6-year-old, you need to change your conduct around my dog, not I need to be considerate of your 6-year-old feelings and control my dog, which I should be doing anyway, you know? So that right there crossed the line for me, and I said, okay, she already said she's scared, you need to heal your dog. And at that point, the woman broke off the conversation. She at no point attempted to interact with her dog, other than saying, she started walking over further into this is like a giant outdoor toy kind of playground equipment thing. She proceeded to walk further into that equipment, further into the area where the children are playing, and say, and mine were the only ones that were there. It wasn't there weren't other children there at the time. And she said, come on, hop up on the playground equipment. You love to play on this. So here it's like, if it were me, I'd be like, oh, I'm so sorry. And then I would grab physical control of my dog put it on the leash that I had handy, and then I would withdraw from the play area so that the children could play. And instead, she chose a vector straight through the play area. And there's nothing on the other side of the play area that, like, her eventual path was away from the play area anyway. So it was a situation where, when confronted about her conduct, and, you know, she's responsible for the dog's conduct.
From
So
Charles Jennings.
I consider
Should I
that,
read it or ignore it?
ignore it. So I consider that, you know, her conduct, you know, because she should have control over the dog. So anyway, the kids were a little concerned about, you know, that, and I just thought it was kind of a 0 F's given response from the dog owner, and generally recalcitrant. And so, I mean, I don't take my kids to a dog park and then demand that all the dogs get under control and stop playing with each other, because that's what it's for. And I see the same thing with playgrounds. Is a playground is a reserved space in our society for children. Now, if it's not being used, I can see using it in a non-harmful way for other purposes, whether it be flying drones or, you know, I could even see, you know, as long as no people are around, archery or something. But it should always be subservient to the original desire for it. So, you know, I'm going to use this playground for this non-playground purpose until people who want to use it for the playground purpose show up, especially children. And, you know, that's how I think that, you know, it should work. So anyway, I just thought it was a really frustrating experience. And then later on, when she was walking her dog, she ended up doing a big loop, and I didn't see what house she came out of, but I saw the direction she came from. So, she, you know, when she was walking back, when she was near a road, she had her dog on a leash. So it wasn't that she had some kind of belief that her dog should always be off of a leash. It just seemed to be a belief that it was, I don't know. I just have to wonder what someone was thinking. Like, I just don't, if I had a dog, I wouldn't take it near a bunch of children playing on a playground. And if I did, then I would put it on a leash. So anyway, I just thought that was, you know, kind of, you know, the whole delusional part of it is that, you know, she was always expecting everyone else to accommodate her and her dog, and I wouldn't have a problem with, you know, maybe her interacting with, you know, other dog owners that way, maybe. Or, you know, I think that in general, you know, I just think that there are so many dog owners that I encounter with kids, and their response is to have the kid change their behavior, which is, you know, I've never had a problem with someone saying, you know, don't bother, you know, don't bother my dog, don't let your kids bother my dog, etc. That's never happened. My kids are always cautious and they love dogs, like I said. So, and also I don't, you know, because my kids don't have a lot of experience with dogs, I don't let them just go and, I don't just let them go wandering around, you know, up to dogs. I also take control of my kids. I don't want them, you know, causing a problem with someone's dog either. And in general, I think, you know, I think people should be able to go around in public with dogs and not have to worry about a bunch of stuff like this. I just think that there are certain situations where they should probably grab greater control. And so anyway, yeah, but I just keep seeing this over and over and over again. There are just neighbors that have dogs that bite people, and it's someone else's problem. And I think it's in denial about the way that they have raised the dog, because fundamentally they're responsible for its socialization and its ability to to follow commands and stuff like this. I've also noticed that in a lot of businesses I go to, there are, you know, they have a policy that's pro-dog, which I'm allergic to dogs, so that can cause breathing discomfort in me. So I kind of, a lot of people, they love the idea of pet policies at work. And I've also noticed that a lot of the people who love these pet policies, if you say, well, what about people with allergies? They almost have a response like, well, allergies aren't real. I know some people who, they have pets that I'm allergic to, and generally they keep them out of the area, but they don't really seem to go out of the way to make, there's like cat fur everywhere or whatever, and maybe even and probably dander, since I don't know how you can get rid of the dander is what you're allergic to, but I don't know how you can get rid of cat dander without cat fur. So they don't seem to like go to a special effort to like clean things up. But yeah, and then when you go into stores, I think Lowe's, they allow dogs, and I was just shopping around looking in the hardware section one day, and just someone came up with their dog who was on a leash, and they just let their dog go up and sniff me a whole bunch. And it's like, look, what is with this? I don't let my kids climb on people, so why would you let your dog go up and sniff people in a store like that? I've seen another thing is some of these dogs that, one of these dogs that sniffed me was wearing a little vest, and it was a therapy dog, which I think that's a system that, just from what I've seen, it seems to be abused. My neighbor growing up, he actually worked for an organization called Canine Companions, and they actually trained the dogs that care for the disabled, and those dogs, he would take home there were a couple of dogs that kind of flunked the program, that didn't do so well for whatever reason, and he would always bring those home, and those dogs were always so well behaved. They would follow instructions really well. I mean, they flunked out of that program, but they were still so much more highly trained than dogs that I meet on an everyday basis. So it's weird, I know that these therapy dog things, people send away their dog to training or whatever, and essentially it gives them permission to walk around with their dog in public. And for the most part, they're the dog is, the dogs I've seen are well behaved, but I don't know, it just seems to be a way to wave away anyone's objections. I mean, there are reasons that people don't want dogs in public places. I mean, I even saw one time, we had a blind guy where I worked, and one time his seeing eye dog pooped in the elevator, and I suspect it was because the dog was not feeling well. But even the highest trained dogs are going to end up getting some of the side effects of having a dog in the area, and you risk bites and stuff like that, as I covered before. So I don't know, I just wish that people would be a little more rational with regard to dog ownership. They'd look at it as an economic liability, because I knew a guy who, he got a golden retriever that he adopted, which I think is another, not being able to call things what they are. Like, I bought a dog, it's always I rescued them or I adopted them. There's this virtue signaling element to it. This is a used car. I didn't adopt it or rescue it. It's just, I bought a car, and it's not a living thing. But by all means, go and change the laws about dogs around the country so that they are not referred to as property. I think that there's a case to be made for that. So anyway, I'm going to wrap it up. But yeah, I just think that people need to be more responsible. Dogs are responsible for a lot of insurance claims. People I've known have had dogs bite people, and they've had to cover it with insurance, and they've had to have, it's been a liability for them financially. And so, especially when it comes to small children, it seems to me a no-brainer to just, if you're going to a playground, clean up after the pet, and maybe just kind of take a perimeter route around the playground at the times when children are there. And you know, children aren't there a lot of the time. You know, a lot of the playgrounds here, even on nice days, there are no children around sometimes when I drive by. So it seems to me like a way that people could workably share. And it just irritated me yesterday when someone crossed the line and they were recalcitrant about it. So in the future, since I usually carry a GoPro with me, I think just on the side of, you know, I don't really have any footage of this because I was giving the dog owner the benefit of the doubt. But next time I think I'm gonna start rolling tape about, you know, at least 50 feet away, just in case anything goofy goes on. I think it's a little more standoffish to start filming people when they approach you, possibly, but it is a public place, and photography is not a crime. So I'm probably gonna do that going forward, and then in the situations where there's no problem, then there's no problem. And in the situations where you end up with a recalcitrant person like this one, then at least I have some documentation to show people, like for example the school, and say, you know, as long as you have people behaving like this, you should either find out who they are and tell them not to come back, or you should probably just change it to a no unleashed dogs on the playground period kind of thing, or no dogs on the playground thing. And this is like this particular playground, there was a very small area of playground and play equipment with benches and stuff around it, and I want to say probably at least 5 acres of just open land around it. So to me, it seems totally workable to share the space. The dogs could be running around in the non-playground equipment area, and the kids could hopefully use both, but mine were only interested in being around the playground equipment that day.